Welcome to Passing the Torch, Stories of Wisdom. I'm Lily Myers Kaplan, the founder and director of Spirit of Resh Foundation. We use story and advocacy to help people build a relationship with death that informs how they live. That's what Passing the Torch is all about. We sit with people whose lives are informed by their experiences of death in ways that touch our hearts and inspire our souls. Thank you for joining us as we listen to stories and pass the torch of wisdom gained from facing one of life's most difficult challenges, the death of a loved one. Thank you to Angel Wing for that beautiful piece of music called The Calling. Any views or opinions expressed in this show called Passing the Torch are solely those of myself, the host, and my guests, and they don't necessarily represent those of KSKQ. Today I'm having a conversation with Robyn DeLong. Her son, Resh Michael, died in a tragic auto accident in 2013. And though she experienced the shattering of her dreams and an unspeakable sorrow, Robyn learned how to stay centered and sane through the shock. In Robyn's own words, she found her way from grief to grace, and she's written a book of that same title. In it is her story filled with a message of hope, love, and the healing possible for anyone dealing with the death of a beloved. Robyn offers inspirational workshops to audiences and in-depth coaching programs to individuals in which she talks about how to find joy from a broken, open heart and ways to use the sacred soil of sorrow to grow their own soul. Robyn shares about the sacred or synchronistic moments tucked inside her experience of mourning. She says that they bring us closer to ourselves and to whatever it is that we call that place within us that knows that all is well. The possibility of being transformed by grief, an experience Robyn knows firsthand, is foundational to our work at Spirit of Resh Foundation, and so we're especially glad to welcome and hear more of Robyn's story here at Passing the Torch. Welcome, Robyn.
Thank you, Lily. I'm so excited to be interviewed with you, especially when I hear the Spirit of Resh Foundation. It just lights me up.
I bet it does. So for our listeners, let me fill them in. Robyn and I first met at a conference in Portland. It was just under a year after Resh Michael had died. And it was for her one of those synchronistic experiences that she's come to trust and really rely on since then. So Robyn, can you share that heart-stopping experience that
It was at the Afterlife Awareness Conference, which was an amazing experience in itself. And Suzanne Northrup, it was towards, I think, the end of maybe the second night we were there, and she was doing this reading of the large audience after showing a demonstration. And she said something like, if you could see what I see, you would see spirits tripping all over themselves trying to get my attention. And I'm on the front row, but I know my son, and I know he's not going to be tripping over anybody trying to get anybody's attention. It's just not his style. So I kind of felt like, okay, he's not going to pop up. But after that was over, I thought, well, let me go see if I can get her book. And I hadn't been back to the book area, and I hadn't been back to where all of the tables are. So I headed over to, her book was sold out. And I thought, well, let me go see in the back. And on my way over there, I said to my son, you know, sweetie, it would be nice to get a sign. I know you didn't want to trip over anybody, but it would be nice to get a sign. And then I go to the very back of this hotel room, and I go to it's a big, huge ballroom. I go to the very back corner, and there's a sign. It's like 4 feet by 8 feet with a big rainbow and the ocean, which one of the ways he shows up is rainbows, and it says Spirit of Resh Foundation. It knocked me over. I mean, that's his stage name. I don't see Resh anywhere else except in all of his stuff. And then I had, you weren't there at the very moment. I had to wait for you to come back to your table. I was so excited to meet you. And just the whole way that the Spirit of Resh Foundation, it was just heart-stopping, you know, to see Spirit of Resh after asking for a sign. I mean, how more literal can you get than a 4 by 8 sign with a rainbow in his song. He says, I'll meet you at the end of the rainbow. I mean, it's part of a song he wrote, the last song he wrote before he died. So, I mean, it doesn't get much clearer than that.
That's beautiful. And it really was. I remember when I walked back up and you were so excited to tell me that story.
Yeah.
And it is true that the word Resh is not a very well-used word, or you don't see it anywhere. And it's actually a Hebrew letter. And in the sacred Hebrew alphabet, between spirit and matter.
I mean, that just melts me.
How did Resh Michael choose that name for himself?
When he was in his probably early 20s, he went to stay at a place called Mount Madonna in the mountains of Santa Cruz. And he took a vow of silence with a monk that's been there for years. And that monk and teacher gave Michael his spiritual name of Naresh, which is a man of God. Michael used Naresh for quite a while, and then he shortened it to Resh. Resh Michael is who he became on stage or whenever he was performing. So a lot of his material says Resh Michael. I just was floored when I saw it.
And the rainbow speaks so strongly to me, and it's why we use it as our symbol at Spirit of Resh Foundation, because it is a gossamer bridge between the worlds.
For me, in a meditation early on, Michael gave me a different way of looking at the rainbow, that it was not only a bridge, but it was like I didn't have to wait. The rainbow is the highest level where all the energies come together, and that's where we go. If we go to that high energy, we can connect. So it's like, I'll meet you at the end of the rainbow. I said, I'll meet you there. So it's where we go to connect.
Both of you really started with a very spiritual relationship to yourselves and within your relationship with each other.
Yes.
And that's become a foundation for you in how the two of you and how you connect with him since he died or left his body. And yet that doesn't change the fact that when he died and it was a tragic, sudden, unexpected death, it doesn't change that you were devastated.
No.
And so it's always important for our listeners to hear the possibilities, but if they hear those possibilities without understanding the very real human experience of sorrow and the devastation that happened, it's a little hard to trust. So tell me how this began for you with your devastation, but also how it began that you started to be able to meet him at the end of the rainbow.
I think any person that has gotten that kind of news where you have no warning, I remember sounds coming out of my body that I had never heard before. I don't want to ever hear them again. It was like that, wailing or keening. It's like it was coming from a deep, deep place of such pain. And my heart hurt. I mean, literally the center of my chest hurt with the pain of it. I remember shaking, and I couldn't control the shaking. I just remember those first few days. I think I've shared with you that I was able to bring his body home. And I think that made all the difference for me, because in those early moments, all I wanted to do was get to him. He was 45 miles away in a morgue, and it took several attempts and lots of help. Finally, a woman who's a funeral director for home funerals was able to help me bring his body home. So I got the news at 7:30 in the morning, and by 5 o'clock, we had retrieved his body, and I had him home. I think that began a lot of my healing. I was able to sob over him. I was also able to, his friends and other members of the family, we were able to be with him in such a personal, loving way. And it was, we decorated it was a cardboard casket. We painted on that. We drew on that. It was like now you do things in your yearbook. We were saying messages to him, and it was like, put his, he always sang, he had 9 or 10 fedoras when he died, those hats. So we put one of his favorites on him. I mean, it was it was incredibly healing and painful, all wrapped up at the same time. And I think that my sister, when I was talking to her, saw a hummingbird, flew into her house, and she said to me, Robyn, I think this is Michael telling us he's okay. And later that same day, the woman that had helped me bring him home pulled a medicine card from the Native American medicine cards that I had, and she pulled hummingbird. So he kept tapping on me, saying, Mom, I'm okay, I'm okay. But still, and I had signed up for a cruise, and I thought, am I going to go on this cruise? I mean, it was happening less than 3 weeks from his death. It was a cruise to Alaska, so it was kind of I could find quiet places. I wasn't in, I was with a friend who goes to my same church, and I knew that it could be sacred. Like, I brought his ashes with me, a little small thing of his ashes, and so he's in the rainforest in Alaska, and he's with the whales, and he was with me.
There's so much beauty in your story, and that's something that I'm struck by and want to come back to. The interface between beauty and pain, you made that very real for our listeners. It's almost like, I want to say, not just two sides of the same coin, but kind of like an infinity symbol, where the making of meaning, the simplest act of placing his favorite fedora on his head and keening over him, back and forth, the beauty and the joy. I can hear the joy of being with him and the intense physical experience of your grief.
Yes.
Woven beautifully together, and how great that you found this home funeral guide who could help you bring his body into your home so that it was a personal experience. And the very real fullness of your grief enabled you to, I think, more fully move your energy.
I guess some of that, I had read Michael Singer's The Untethered Soul several times before my son Mike. Interesting, Michael Singer, the author of Untethered Soul, and my son Michael, the singer. It's another little coincidence there. But I had read his book, and there's some key principles about first developing that noticer, that witness, so you can pay attention to what's going on. He also says to feel your feelings fully, don't bury them, and to keep your heart open. Those were with me. That plus Jack Canfield's, he says, it's you have an event, and then you have your response to the event gives you your outcome. And I knew that I had to pay attention to how I responded. But it wasn't conscious. It was built into me. And I think that when I wanted to stuff it, I would go, no, if you don't allow this pain, you won't feel the joy. And it was all present at the same time. And it was the strangest, I call it an elixir of pain and joy that I was so aware of, standing in the middle of it, letting it all wash over me.
An elixir, it's like a magical substance that you took in.
Mm-hmm.
This blending, this alchemical thing of pain, this blending, this pain and sorrow and joy and possibility. Part of the elixir that you've just described is this meaning making. It's what I call meaning making. The story of the hummingbird coming into your sister's home. How often does a hummingbird come inside the house? And then the pulling of this imagery out of a deck of cards, simultaneously showing you something, and that for you gave that meaning.
Yes.
Some people would say that's a coincidence. Carl Jung calls that a synchronicity, which is a higher level of coincidence. And that by making meaning, how did that impact how you started to feel in your body? Because you said your center of your chest literally hurt. And as you made more meaning and had these experiences, did that change that?
Oh, it did. An image that came to me very early on, I felt like I'd been hit by a meteor, like it had just smashed a crater in my heart. And when a crater hits the earth, it's like I think Lake Tahoe is a beautiful example of this amazing body of water that got filled. into to heal. So I could feel the love coming my way from all of the family and friends and Michael, and just, pouring in. So it was like I had this image of this healing water coming in, and I would just breathe it in. And there's a poem about the deeper pain carves into your soul, the more joy you can hold. And that's what I was experiencing.
How did you feel the love?
From Michael, in the moment that I was getting the news, I've heard his voice twice, clearly, like he was right next to me, not an inner voice tell me he was sorry. In the middle of me getting this news, I could hear that. And then 3 weeks later, when I was on that cruise ship, I woke up really early in the morning, and oftentimes I would wake up with the sobbing to start. And I had a roommate, I did not want to awaken her. And I thought, well, let me go out on the little patio that they have. And there was a sunrise coming, and I thought, I'm just going to go upstairs. So I put the goofy robe on that they give you, and I went up to the top deck. And it was very misty and slippery, and there wasn't a soul around. And I was just letting it all out. I was just sobbing. And I heard Michael. I would tell you to this day, it was Michael standing right behind me, even though I physically couldn't see him. I heard him say, Mom, and I stopped, and he said, Mom. And he says, pay attention to the beauty all around you. I've got this magnificent sunrise. Pay attention to the beauty all around you. Don't miss it being sad, wishing things were different. I'm right here. And I just took this huge breath, and I did. I looked around and I thought, boy, that's not just for today. That's not just for today. Don't miss the beauty, wishing things were different. That was his guidance, and it's continued to guide me to be totally aware of I would see parents saying goodbye to their children at the airport, and it would just melt me. I mean, there was just, I would go to the soccer game to watch my grandsons, and I would see mothers holding their babies, and I would just feel this melting because I knew how precious those moments are. So life became way more precious. I was sitting at a signal in my car at the local junior high, and the kids were crossing in front, and I saw this gentleman tapping his watch and scolding his teenage daughter, probably because she was. I thought, if you only knew how precious. So I try and remember that when I see my grandchildren. And it continues to this day. Michael, it's not as frequent as it was in the first year, but the day I called you, I told you I called you to talk to you about how I can support the Spirit of Resh Foundation. And as I'm on the phone talking to you, the music box goes off with his voice, his singing, and you have to lift the lid, but not when he wants to use it.
You told me that, and I want to hear more of those stories, but before we do, I don't want to lose something really, I think, very profound that you just said. Life is precious.
All of it.
All of it.
All of it.
The good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. And I love that you heard him say, don't miss the beauty because you're sad. It doesn't mean you can't be sad.
Yeah.
None of this is saying appreciate the preciousness of life, that therefore never feel sad. To feel all of that and be present for the beauty and the preciousness of every moment that we get to live and breathe, that's quite a practice.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've been practicing that for 5 years or so.
This was like, are these tools going to work when these bullets are flying on this field? Yeah, they do. I had built a foundation, I think, that allowed me to really notice what I was noticing. That's probably the number one to notice that I'm in pain, to notice the thoughts that want to plant themselves. That's so important. To notice the triggers, to see when I'm experiencing sadness, and that's okay. It's like learning to ride those waves of sadness, because they wash over you, but they're not. If you notice, they come and they're like a big wave, and if you learn to surf them, you can say, okay, here we go. We're going to ride this, and then it'll stop, and then there might be another one, and they'll space themselves out, and eventually it's just calm. I don't get waves of sadness as much as I will still have moments of, oh, I wish he was here to see this, or he was such an amazing performer. And I'll see, I'll see someone performing, and I'll be reminded of how much joy I got watching him perform. Yeah, it's still a mixture.
And I would imagine it will be forever.
Yeah. I refused to hear people say you'll never heal. There'll always be a hole in your heart. And I thought, actually, my heart's been broken open, and I like it broken open. So I'm going to live that joyful place that makes you really aware of life with a broken open heart.
That's a very different way of talking about it, to say a broken open heart as opposed to simply a broken heart. That's a choice. And that's a choice that you made, and it's not necessarily an easy choice for everyone to make. Is that a choice that you have to make over and over again?
I will notice when I'm inclined to close my heart. I'm more aware of the need when something happens.
Now, you said something about keeping your heart open and choosing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that made easier, or when you're struggling with that, do you find that that's when you have these what we're calling messages or synchronistic experiences or sacred moments where the music box starts playing that, like you said, when he wants to play it, you don't need to open the top?
I think it happens when I tune in. More likely when I'm
The top?
I think it happens when I tune in. More likely when I'm tuned in, or when I really get tuned in. And I think it's more, you talked about me making the meaning. We get to make up whatever meaning we want to, right? That's our gift. When I was teaching him as a child how to talk, like you have a bottle, and this is a bottle, and this is mama, and this is daddy. And, you start teaching words early on, and then they pick up those symbols. You're teaching symbology. And I think I'm the infant, he's the teacher, teaching me what different symbols mean. Hummingbird was an early symbol. Numbers was another symbol. He would wink at me with numbers all the time. Still winks at me with numbers.
What do you mean? Explain how he winks at you with numbers.
Well, when you get a code, like I would say, like when a child gets, oh, that's what that means, then they'll use it more often. If you're familiar with numerology at all, Michael's birth number is a 9. And I have, mine's a 6. So 11 means opening to me, and 9 is which you look at 9 in the numerology, it's a fairly high advanced number. It's a completion number. I started exploring when I got that code. He was 36, which is 9. He died the 99th day after his 36th birthday. He'd had 9 leap years. He died on a day that added up to an 11. So 9 and 11 are those numbers, and then I'm a 6. So sometimes he'll do 1111, which I think is like the opening. It's like he says hi to me. I'll just look at my watch, and it's, it's a number that is a 9 and a 6, or a 9 and a 6 and 11, or it's beyond coincidental that when I will look at my number, it'll be like 945, which is a double 9. That's what happens.
The more you accept them as signs, the more those kinds of things happen to you.
And so when I see them, I say, hi, I love you. Yesterday, it was Christmas, and it was kind of a quiet day around here, and I thought, well, it would be nice to have a little sign. And the next thing you know, on one of the stations starts playing It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas, which is the first song on his Christmas album. And he sang a lot of Italian. So I'll be in a restaurant, and all of a sudden I'll hear an Italian opera it's like he's just filtering in and out, and I'll hear him. And then I say, I love him. I say, I love you.
That's a very sweet way of keeping him alive in your heart. Mm-hmm. And I want to share with you and with our listeners, because I always share a reading or a poem or something.
Yeah.
And this one really spoke to me about the way that you've related to Michael, to Resh Michael, since his death, as a continuance. Mm-hmm. And I think that word will make sense when I read this reading. This is from Thich Nhat Hanh from his book At Home in the World, and it's called I Am Not In Here. He says, I have a disciple in Vietnam who wants to build a stupa for my ashes when I die. He and others want to include a plaque with the words, Here lies my beloved teacher. I told them not to waste the temple land. Do not put me in a small pot and put me in there, I said. I don't want to continue like that. It would be better to scatter the ashes outside to help the trees grow. I suggested that if they still insist on building a stupa, they have the plaque, I'm not in here. But in case people don't get it, they could add a second plaque. I am not out there either. If people still don't understand, then you can write on the third and last plaque, I may be found in your way of breathing and walking. This body of mine will disintegrate, but my actions will continue in me. In my daily life, I always practice to see my continuation all around me. We don't need to wait until the total dissolution of this body to continue. We continue in every moment. If you think that I am only this body, then you have not truly seen me. When you look at my friends, you see my continuation. When you see someone walking with mindfulness and compassion, you know he is my continuation. That is what I hear in your seeing and feeling and hearing Resh Michael in all these different ways that he appears to you, and that your heart swells. And when you hear the word Spirit of Resh Foundation, how it makes you happy.
It's precious, precious, yes.
So we need to wrap up, sadly, because it's such a juicy conversation. But before we do, I want to ask you to let our listeners know if they're called to reach out to you, to talk to you about their story or for coaching, how would they contact you?
I'm glad to give my phone number. I have no qualms about doing that. It's my direct line, my cell phone number, so they can call or text 916-224-9580. My website is my name, Robyn DeLong, ROBYNDLONG.com.
Thank you so much for your sharing of your deep and beautiful and painful story with all of us.
Thank you, Lily. It's been a joy.